wading into the thorny issue of biblical marriage and the speculative issue of resurrection, Jesus is put to the test. As elsewhere in the Bible, Jesus doesn't fall into the trap, but reframes the question to teach about living in the fullness of God's grace. A reading from Luke, chapter 20, verses 27 to 38. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. Thanks be to God for these words of life.
Before I begin my formal remarks, I need to tell you a little something that happened to me this morning. I've been preaching for 40 years. I know, hard to imagine I'm that old. And never in those 40 years did I get to a Sunday morning and not have my sermon written and in hand, except for this morning. I had saved it, I was sure. I had backed it up, I was sure. I had practiced it, I knew, because I stood above my washing machine, as I often do, and practiced. I had written it on Wednesday. Actually, I start my sermons 8 weeks before, and they were all in place. And when I went to print it this morning, here at about 8:15, 8:30 this morning, print it, it was gone. All copies, everything gone. Yes, I opened a Googler, and I looked to see how I could recover the files. All of their suggestions were absolutely worthless. So between 8:30 and 9:30, I retyped my sermon. I don't know if this one is as good as the one that I had earlier, but it was very, very disassociative for me. And there was an old wag who said, if you really want to hear the best sermon, walk home with the preacher, because that's when we figure out what we've done. So, with those provisos and many others, will you join me in prayer? May the words of my mouth fertilize your planted seeds, O God. Amen. Today's text deals with siblings and children and religious zealots and angels and eternity, quite a package. I visit my mother frequently on Saturdays, and she always asks me the same thing on Saturday: what's your sermon about? And yesterday I told her ancient marriage practices, the Supreme Court, music, Popeye the Sailor Man. She said, well, that should be interesting. And I said, as I always do, we'll see. Marriage, remarriage, and religious zealots. As if marriage isn't complicated enough. Even in our time, it remains complicated. It was complicated then, it is complicated now. The Supreme Court is deciding whether or not they're going to hear an appeal by Kim Davis. You may remember her from years ago, a Kentucky clerk who wants to challenge the Supreme Court's marriage decisions based on her religious grounds. The question that the Supreme Court is being asked is a political one wrapped in theological trappings. I wonder how they will decide about marriage. Jesus is asked a similar question. What about marriage? What is marriage and how does it work? This is called Laverite marriage in the Hebrew tradition, and it ensured that the family line always continued on. It was there to protect families, but more so to protect women as well. In the ancient culture of marriage, these values enhanced the life of men and women alike. It was a male-dominated society, truly a patriarchy. Father Abraham had many children. What they leave out is by many wives. Father Abraham had many children. I am one of them. It was a male-dominated society, and marriage was crucial to maintaining stability in the community. And if a brother died, the next brother was to marry the widow if there were no children. The brothers cared for one another, and they bore children by these women. These families were their own welfare system, their own economies. You see how this works, is that my brother Tom, I have three, my brother Tom, who is older than me, would marry, and then if he died without a child, then I had the obligation to marry his wife. And then if I died, Dan would have to marry his wife, my wife, now Dan's wife, and if Dan died, David would hopefully live to marry her as well. Marriage. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are the two groups in this particular story. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead as if you were resurrected as you lived. They didn't say whether you were a child or a grown person or an old person. They just said that you were resurrected bodily and holy as you are entirely. The Sadducees scoffed at this idea of resurrection, and they asked difficult questions. Difficult questions are what the church is meant to deal with. Verse 32 and 33. Finally, the woman died also after she had been married and death. At some point, I would have been afraid to marry her. You know, when you get to number 6, you got to wonder about the cooking. Verse 32 and 33. Finally, the woman died also. And then the question, in the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will this woman be? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, or 7? For the 7 had married her. Now, Jesus knows that the Sadducees and the Pharisees are vying for strength in the community. The Pharisees were a rising power. The Sadducees had power. The Sadducees were the keepers of the temple. They were actually the ones who actually kept the temple in Jerusalem. They were the political strength of the time, the rising and glorious ones who controlled all of the political power and the court. Sound familiar? And Jesus knows that the Sadducees' question is a political one wrapped in a theological trapping. And everybody wants Jesus to pick sides. Isn't that us? We want Jesus to pick sides. Well, we don't want Jesus to pick sides. We want Jesus to pick our side. Jesus, tell me I'm correct. I'm the right one. I'm the one who has the wisdom. Jesus, tell me that the things that I'm praying for, the things that you would be praying for. It always surprises me how much the God that we love looks like the prejudices that we have. But Jesus is wily. Jesus sides with God and with gratitude. He doesn't pick between the two. He picks for God and gratitude. I like how Jan Richardson puts it. The Sadducees assume that their argument that the resurrection of life is the same quality or same order as our present life. They expect people will marry in the resurrection, for example. Their argument depends on this. And then Richardson says they are wrong, according to Jesus, because the life of the resurrection will be fundamentally different. They neither marry nor are given in marriage, says Jesus. The Sadducees have made a categorical error, a category mistake. Jesus says no. He will not pick sides. It is a category mistake. Life with God is fundamentally different. Jesus is focused on God and focused on who we are with God. We argue about who deserves to get food to eat. God says, feed the hungry. Eternity and the present moment. Professor William Loader, Jesus is operating with a theology of God which says, even in death, God is with us, and therefore we must be with God. Even in death, God is with us, and we must be with God. It strikes me that the dead live with us. The dead live with us. In my first parish, we were in a small town, and our church had a cemetery, not right next to the church, but on the edge of where the town met the farms. And so I would drop by that cemetery every once in a while just because I was the pastor and happened to be driving by and thought, I might as well. And oftentimes I would see a police car parked in a particular spot on the top of one of the small hills in the cemetery. And I recognized the car as the chief's car, the chief of police. Ray was his name. And Ray and I knew one another, got along pretty well. And so one day I screwed up my courage and I said, Ray, I often see your car up there in our cemetery. You're too far from the road to be in a speed trap. What are you doing there? And he kind of blushed a little bit. And he said, I'm talking to my wife. You see, his wife had died, and he had selected a grave just beside the road so that he could stop and talk to her. And he said, when I talk through my problems with her, it comes clear for me, and I know what to do. The dead live with us. Winston Churchill, a man verbose in so many ways. He would be what the staff thought was alone in his office, and yet they would hear him talking as though there were people in the office with him. And they were surprised by Churchill. And one day somebody asked, and they found out that he talked to great figures in history, those who he admired throughout history, who were great leaders, and he found in them the wisdom that he needed for his time in history. He was probably a little nuts and a little drunk like most leaders, but it was a curious thing where he brought the dead to life around him. The dead live with us, and all of us live with God. So let's not make a category mistake here. Jesus expands expands our sense of God beyond life and death and our categories of marriage and peculiarities. And we are unabashedly grateful. This surprises people, but I don't know what happens after death. I don't. I ain't been dead yet. I do know that God is more than life and death. In verse 38, Jesus says, "Now God is not God of the dead, but of the living. For to God, all of them are alive." Doubt, doubters, and God's presence. I don't know about in your life, but in my life, the Sadducees and the Pharisees are just all around me, fighting about theology and God and who gets fed and who doesn't get fed and who gets money and who doesn't get money and who's more religious and who isn't more religious. I can't tell you how many times on Facebook I've been called a heretic. It's kind of a badge of honor for me because I believe the way that I believe. But I don't engage the fools or the wise on Facebook, for it will profit me nothing. But around me, not only on Facebook, but just in daily life, the Sadducees and the Pharisees are around us trying to make us doubt our beliefs. Doubt surrounds us. Doubt surrounds all of us. Do you know who the nones are? Not nuns, nones, N-O-N-E-S. 30% of the population in the United States are nones. They believe that the church is fighting about foolishness. All of the yapping that we hear about who God is and what God is seems so much foolishness to them. They hear us arguing about who God would love and accept, which seems an absolute ridiculous question even to them. When there are surveys that are taken and they ask, "What is your religion?" the nones click none of the above. None of the above. Nones. They are the fastest growing group of young adults in the United States and in Western Europe and in much of Latin America. They are deeply committed to tolerance and inclusivity and to love and grace and hope and service and economic justice. All the things that we are about because Jesus is about those, but they don't want to deal with our church. They are filled with doubt, as are we. And here is the confession. We too are filled with doubt. Deep down in our gut, in the part of our being that we don't confess, sometimes even to ourselves. We have abiding moments of doubt. And that's okay. That's part of having faith. I'm hemmed in on all sides by belief and by lack of belief, by doubt loudly expressed and faith deeply held. I know what I cannot explain what I know. Yet there is God living beyond our selfishly inadequate explanations. Our expressions of God are ephemeral and fleeting and dubious. Yet the presence of God is vivid, enchanting, life-giving, confounding, and reassuring. Like Job, like Abraham, like Julian of Norwich, like Saint Teresa and Mother Teresa, and like Renetta Weems, and all the saints that are clouded with doubt, I confess that my God is God, and I am unabashedly grateful. Ultimately, it is love. Love for others and the grand of creation. Such is the presence of God. I am unabashedly grateful for God's love and my doubt. I am loved. I don't know why I am loved, because there is no why. I love. I don't know why I love, because there is no why. Love is, God is, and I am unabashedly grateful. Mothers, children, love, and grace. Bonnie Raitt. Bonnie Raitt? Yeah. Bonnie Raitt's music buoys my soul. Bonnie Raitt is somebody you should listen to, but she is fantastically difficult to categorize. She is blues and rock, R&B, soul, and folk all mixed in there together. She is a singer and songwriter who has won 13 Grammys. In 2022, Raitt won a Grammy for Most Important Song of the Year, titled Just Like That. Raitt's splendid song, Just Like That, is based on a true story of a mother whose teenaged son died. The mother is sunk in bottomless grief. And the most poignant lyric of the song for me comes as the mother expresses her devastating loneliness. The mother says, "They say Jesus brings you peace and grace. Well, he ain't found me yet." In this song, a man comes to the mother's door, and she lets him into her house and her life because he has kind eyes. The man, you see, well, the mother doesn't know it, is the recipient of the dead boy's donated heart. And the mother lays her head on the man's chest and hears her son's heartbeat life into the man. And just like that, the mother finds healing, peace, and grace. Into bottomless death comes the God of life. And I will live in unabashed gratitude. Marriage, doubt, and Popeye. In Exodus 3:14, God quotes Popeye the Sailor Man. I am who I am. Yeah. Moses questions God. When God says, "Go and tell the people about me," Moses says, "What do I tell them?" And God says, "I am what I am. Yeah. I am who I will be." God is, you see. God is, I am, and that is enough, and I am grateful. Comforted by your doubt. Live in the midst of life's questions. Be filled with your own strength of doubt. Be open to the surprises of eternity in your life. Live life's questions. God is, I am, and I am grateful. Therefore, I will live with unabashed gratitude.